Hi, everyone. This is It's a Mystery Podcast. I'm Alexandra Amore, and I'm here today with Peter Bartram. Hi, Peter.
Good morning, Alexandra.
How are you today?
I'm very well, and how about yourself?
I'm good. Yeah, it's a little soggy here in Vancouver today, but otherwise, doing well. So,
Excellent.
let me introduce you to our listeners. Peter Bartram brings years of experience as a journalist to his Crampton of the Chronicle crime mystery series, which features crime reporter Colin Crampton in 1960s Brighton, England. Peter's novels are fast-paced and humorous. The action is matched by the laughs. Peter began his career as a reporter on the Worthing Herald newspaper in the UK before working as a journalist and editor in London, and finally becoming freelance. He has done most things in journalism, from doorstepping for quotes to writing serious editorials. He's pursued stories in locations as diverse as a 700 feet down a coal mine and a courtier's chambers at Buckingham Palace. Peter has written 21 nonfiction books, including 5 ghost-written, in areas such as biography, current affairs, and how-to titles, before turning to crime and penning Headline Murder, the first novel in the Crampton of the Chronicle series. So welcome, Peter. I just wanted to start kind of back at the beginning and ask you, what prompted you to make the switch from nonfiction to fiction after such a long career in nonfiction?
Well, I'd always wanted to do it. Basic problem was that there's originally I thought no money in it, but that may ultimately prove to be wrong. Only time will tell. The fact of the matter is, I worked all my career as a journalist. I was a freelance journalist from 1974 onwards. And when you're a freelance journalist and you're earning your living from it, you have to keep your nose to the grindstone, writing features and stories and commissioned non-fiction books all the time. And it's only in recent years that I've had a chance to do this, which is something that I've always wanted to do.
Okay. And so Colin and the stories that are set in Brighton, you specifically chose to set them in the 1960s. So why is that?
Well, the 1960s is a great fun decade. It's the swinging 60s. It's only one of 2 decades during the 20th century which had its own name with capital letters. So there's the swinging 60s and the roaring 20s.
Okay.
Not surprisingly, quite a few mystery novels are set in the roaring 20s as well. So you've got to set them in these interesting decades. The other reason was that I began my journalistic career in the 1960s. And so I was familiar with what newspaper newsrooms were like in those days and how news gathering went about. And it's very different from the way in which it's done today. I mean, there were no computers, there are no mobile phones. The newspapers were set in hot metal, literally hot lead, which was cooled. And it was a totally different process. When you went out on a story, there was no question of you phoning in from your mobile phone with the copy. You had to go and find a phone box somewhere to do it.
Right.
Sometimes by fair means or foul.
Yeah.
And so, this struck me as being a kind of fun decade to set this newspaper story in.
Yes. And it's set in Brighton. Do you live in Brighton?
Well, I lived in Brighton for 30 years. I now live about 6 miles to the west of Brighton on the Sussex coast. But, I mean, I've lived and worked in Brighton for 30 years, so I know this city very, very well indeed.
Yes. And I think it was on your website I saw that you had described the city. It's kind of this mix of a lovely seaside resort combined with a lot of nefarious activity, racketeers and all that kind of stuff. So explain to us what was going on at that time in Brighton.
Well, let me just give you a kind of potted history of Brighton. I mean, it started off in medieval times as a kind of little fishing village, and then it came to prominence during the 18th century when a local doctor suggested that sea bathing would be very beneficial for your health. And the town was then patronised by the Prince Regent, who went on to become King George IV. And it became very fashionable and it grew. And then in the 19th century, the railway from London to Brighton was built, so that thousands of people would come to visit Brighton very quickly at the weekend. And it developed this kind of loose image, you've heard of the phrase of the dirty weekend. Brighton is the home of the dirty weekend.
Okay.
And it's a home of all sorts of nefarious characters. It's also been a place where many writers and actors have lived. People like Terence Rattigan, Laurence Olivier, Vivian Leigh, all sorts of people like this have lived in Brighton. So, it's a very, very colourful place in which to set crime mysteries, and of course other writers have done so as well.
Yes, yeah. And so tell us a little bit about Colin. And I noticed he's 28 when the series starts, and he's a reporter. So how close is he in temperament to you?
Well, now, Colin, I think, is an aggregate of all sorts of journalists and reporters that I've known over the years.
Okay.
I've taken a little bit of that person over there and a little bit of that person over there and a few bits of other people, and I've put them together to make Colin. He's like many journalists. He's after the truth a lot of the time, but he doesn't really care how he gets it. And when I was thinking of the character of Colin, I was thinking of something that Nicholas Tomlin, very famous journalist in the UK, once said about journalism. He said that to be an excellent journalist, you need three qualities. First of all, a personable manner. Second, a little literary ability. And thirdly, a rat-like cunning. And Colin has, I think, all three of those qualities.
Oh, okay. And what I loved was that on your website, you've got a little character sketch of each of the four main characters in the books with an actual drawing. How did that come about?
Well, during my journalistic career, I've edited various newspapers and magazines, and during part of that time, I was working with a very talented artist called Caroline Duffy. And when it came to doing the Colin Crampton books, I thought it would be a wonderful idea to have some sketches of these main characters. And Caroline did these, and they're absolutely superb. And they've been of great value in the series.
Yeah, I just was blown away because I think that's the first time I've ever seen a sketch of a character, on an author's website. And, so often as readers, we have to imagine what the character looks like based on the author's description. But it's just fantastic. So Shirley is there, Colin's on again, off again girlfriend, who we'll talk about more in a little minute. And then his boss,
Frank
Figgis with a cigarette, of course, in his mouth. And then Ted Wilson, the local constable.
Yeah, he's a detective inspector, right?
Oh, he's a DI, okay.
The books are set in Brighton in the 1960s, as you mentioned earlier. In those days, Brighton had its own police force. That was all changed in 1968 when police forces in the United Kingdom were completely reorganised. But up to 1968, Brighton had its own police force. It was notable in the UK, the English policemen's helmets, they're normally blue. In Brighton, during the summer, they were white.
Oh.
Which made it very distinctive. But also, the Brighton police force was notably corrupt. And so Ted Wilson is one of the few honest cops in the Brighton police force. And therefore, he's one of Colin's contacts there.
Right. And so where did the corruption come from?
Well, it was all sorts of backstairs deals. You must remember that Brighton was a very loose town with all sorts of cash industries, like amusement arcades and restaurants and all palais and all of that sort of thing, and many of which required licenses. So there was all sorts of opportunities for backhanded deals. I mean, we're not talking about major international corruption of the kind that you get these days with tax evasion and all the rest of it. We're talking about small-time stuff. But, a lot of it went on.
Yes, yeah. So let's touch on Shirley just briefly, and then I want to ask you about the research that you've done. I love the description on your website with Shirley's little sketch that she looks like a supermodel, but when roused, she's got a mouth like a trucker.
Oh, that's right, yes. Absolutely.
And so she's working her way around the world, which I thought was kind of interesting. She's young, she's 23. For someone in those days, she was kind of at the crest of that world traveling generation, I think.
Well, that's right. But I mean, a lot of them used to do it in those days, particularly Australians and New Zealanders. Most of them used to congregate in London, particularly in the Earl's Court part of London. And when I first went to work in London, in Fleet Street, on newspapers in the late 1960s, I met quite a number of them up there. But I thought, as I'm set in Brighton, it would be good for Shirley to turn up in Brighton. And she turns up in Brighton and features in the first book in the series, Headline Murder.
Yeah, she sounds like quite a character. I'm looking forward to reading the book. And we should mention, too, that, let me see. So there's a novella that's free on your website, Murder in Capital Letters.
Now, Murder in Capital Letters is free on the website, and it's effectively a prequel to Headline Murder. So if you want to know what happens in the month before Headline Murder, when Colin has only just met Shirley, and she helps him in his first big case, go to my website where you can download Murder in Capital Letters absolutely free. It doesn't cost you a penny or a cent.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people know where to go and they can try the book out. And I'm going to try it myself for sure. So let's talk about research. So you were a journalist in the 60s and you were there with your feet on the ground. Do you find that you have to do a bit of research when you're writing the stories, or do you just go from memory?
Well, the answer to both questions is yes and yes.
Okay.
I think the best kind of research is actually having been there and seen it, because you can pick up more of the subtle detail, the atmosphere, the culture of something by actually having been there and done it. But then at the same time, there are obviously times when you need to research details, things, specific little bits of information that you need from the 1960s. For example, I'm notoriously bad at knowing which pop songs were in vogue in the 1960s, even though I was there. So if I'm going to mention a pop song in the 1960s, I have to go on the internet, and there are plenty of sites where you can just type in a date and they'll give you the top 10 or the top 20 in the UK or the US in that particular week, in that particular year. You can find things. But, what I tend to do is I don't do a lot of research before I start writing. I then, as I go along, if I suddenly realise I need to know a little bit of information about this part of town, I will go and do a little bit of research about it. It's a bit like the way in which journalists work, in fact. We don't go around doing a lot of unnecessary research, but we do the research that we need for what we're going to write in our stories. Kind
of on the fly, as you go, as the need comes up.
That's right,
yeah.
Hitting the deadlines, getting the copy out.
That's right, yeah. And so because of your experience as a journalist, do you find that you write quite quickly?
Yeah, on the whole, I do write quite quickly. Obviously there are moments when you sit back and think, what's going to happen next? My approach to writing is to think the whole book out in scenes. So I would plan the whole book in scenes. So I'm just planning the third full-length novel in the Crampton of the Chronicle series, and I've already planned that. There are 73 scenes, so I know what's going to happen in each scene, but I don't always know exactly how it's going to happen in each scene.
Yeah.
So I've got a roadmap, but I've also left myself plenty of opportunity to introduce new elements by how things happen.
Yeah, okay. I lost my next question. Anyway, doesn't matter.
You were so enthralled in my last answer, that's why.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. So you've got a new book coming out, Stop Press Murder.
Stop Press Murder, that's out in August, yes.
1st of August 2016 as we record this. And that's a full-length novel as well?
That is a full-length novel as well, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, that's the second in the series. So, Headline Murders takes place in the summer of 1962, and Stop Press Murder takes place in the summer of 1963.
Okay, so you're moving them along chronologically.
It's one year later.
Yes, yeah, okay, great. And so the one you mentioned that you're outlining now, that's your 2017 title.
That's my 2017 title, and that takes place in the week leading up to Christmas, 1964.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. And one of the things that struck me about...
A very interesting thing happened in the week leading up to Christmas,
okay.
1964, to do with crime in the UK.
Yeah.
Because it was the week in which Parliament passed the bill to abolish hanging.
Oh, really? Wow.
In the UK.
Yes.
So that's not many people know that.
No.
So I thought that would be a very good background to a crime novel.
Yes, yeah. Have you been in a newspaper office lately? I'm just wondering how much they've changed since the 60s and since you were...
Well, I freelance now, and, what with the internet and laptop computers and all the rest of it, we tend to do our work from where we are. And if I want to talk to people, I often talk to people on Skype in other offices. But, I have been in modern newspaper offices, and it's all computers now. There's not a lot of paper running around the place. You proof the pages on screens, on huge screens. You don't have the hot metal. The newspaper's not set in hot metal type as it used to be in my day. Line by line, we called each line was called a slug. And so if there was a mistake in a line, like a letter out of place, the whole line had to be reset. So you can imagine this was a pretty time-consuming activity, putting newspapers together in those days.
I've always wondered about that. And weren't the letters put in backwards?
They were upside down, certainly. So what happened? You typed your copy on old-fashioned typewriters.
Yeah.
And it would then go to a copy editor, a sub-editor, who would sub-edit it. You typed your copy on copy paper, which was kind of thin like that. So you would never type more than about two short paragraphs on each short page. So that if the sub-editors wanted to reorder the information that you've given, they could just shuffle the pages. This is what you did before cut and paste was invented. You reshuffled bits of paper. And it was then sent to compositors, people who were called compositors, who sat at linotype machines. And these were huge machines which had a QWERTY keyboard, but were linked up to a magazine, which, I don't mean a magazine, but a thing that holds things, which held letters, little moulds for letters. So when you type the letter A little letter A would come rattling down and place itself in a little tray by the side of the machine, and then you would set a line, just one line, and you then press a button, and that would go off and be hot metal, molten lead would be squirted into it, and it would then go through water so that lead would settle very quickly, and then that line would go into a tray, another tray, and the other lines would build up on top of it so that you've got a column of type. And you would have dozens of these machines in a national newspaper doing this all the time. And so when you got the column of type, that would go away and someone would roll some ink over the top of it and put a piece of paper on top of it and then roll the paper, and then you've got a proof. Proof. And then when all the columns were made, you take them away and they were all been proved and corrected. You would take them away and put them in a form, which is a square thing, column by column, to make up the page. So, I mean, that's a cut-down version of how it all worked. You needed, in the national newspaper, thousands of people to do that, and it was a very time-consuming business because you had to do it very, very quickly. And yet, on, for example, London evening newspapers, using that system, they would bring out 8 editions a day between 9 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. Wow. Amazing, really. And so it must be so different now. I mean, even just in the description on your website, you mentioned the newsroom is full of cigarette smoke, for example.
Well, it's certainly full of cigarette smoke in those days.
In the 60s, yeah, exactly.
In the 60s, but it won't be full of cigarette smoke in the UK now because smoking is banned in all workplaces and indeed public buildings.
Right, yes, yeah.
I don't know what the situation is in Canada.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, no smoking.
Same there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it must have been a smoky, loud place in the newsroom.
It was smoky and it was loud. It was exciting and it was enormous fun.
Yes. So it must be fun for you then to revisit it via Colin and Shirley.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And I can make Colin do some things that I didn't get round to doing. There weren't many things that I didn't get round to doing, but there were a few. And Colin is doing them.
Yes, yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being with me today, Peter. And so we'll look forward to your new book on August 1st, 2016. And so why don't you tell our listeners where they can find out more about Colin and his mates?
Right, well, you can find out about Colin and his mates by going to www.colincrampton.com. So that's Colin Crampton, CRAMPTON.com.
Perfect.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra.
Oh,
it's been huge fun.
And thank you very much for being with me today. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.